Welcome to the Texas Wine Scene Podcast, the most up-to-date information to help you prepare for your wine tasting weekend. I'm Mike, your Texas Wine Scene correspondent, bringing you all the wine happenings in and around the great state of Texas, from the high plains to the hill country. If you love Texas wine, you've come to the right place. Let's take a trip. Welcome back, everyone, to the Texas Wine Scene Podcast. I am your host, your Texas Wine Scene correspondent, Mike Cole, bringing you all the wine happenings in and around the great state of Texas. Happy Hispanic Heritage Month to everyone out there. Thank you for joining us on this week's episode. And what better way to celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month than to talk about wines from our neighbors to the south, Mexico. But before we get into that interview with a wonderful young lady who's going to be giving us all the goods about Mexican wine, let's talk about a few events we have going on for the upcoming weekends. The Texas Hill Country Wineries Roadshow is on Thursday, October 24th from 5:30 to 8 p.m. in San Antonio, Texas at the Dominion Country Club. There'll be 27 wineries and over 60 wines being poured at this event, so get your tickets soon before it's all sold out. The 20th annual H-E-B Wine Walk is at Market Street in the Woodlands in the Houston area on Thursday, October 17th from 6 to 9 p.m. The 11th annual El Paso Wine Fest Grand Tasting event is on Saturday, October 19th from 1 to 4 p.m. The second annual West Texas Wine Festival is on Saturday, October 19th from 1 to 6 p.m. in Abilene, Texas. The Piney Woods Wine Festival is on Friday and Saturday, October 18th and 19th from 4 to 9 p.m. on Friday and 11 to 7 p.m. on Saturday. The 9th annual Taste of Cedar Park is on October 15th from 6 to 9 p.m. And the Fredericksburg Food and Wine Festival is on Saturday, October 26th from 1 to 5:30 p.m. and they'll have 25 culinary experiences and hands-on demos, as well as over 55 wineries, spirits, and breweries at this event. So this is one you definitely want to check out. Get up there and get your tickets. I think the VIP tickets may be sold out for this event, but there's plenty of general admission tickets available. So get your tickets soon before they're all sold out. And without further ado, let's get into our interview for this weekend's episode, and we'll be talking about wines from Mexico. And today we're here with a young lady who is doing some really big things here in the heart of the west side of San Antonio. And I'll let her introduce herself, and we're going to get into talking about what she's doing with her wine tasting room.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm excited not only to hold the space, but to ultimately present wines to everyone out there that's curious and interested in the experience and elevating their wine palate through Mexican wine. So thank you for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about how to pronounce your last name?
Yes, of course. So our last name is Guipzot. My husband and I know we're going to get through this a little bit further, but yeah, our last name Guipzot comes from Coahuila. He's the only family in Mexico with this last name. And he can actually trace his roots to a Frenchman entering pre-Mexican Revolution, late 1800s, entering through Veracruz, his grandfather being born in San Luis Potosí, and then ending up in the middle of Coahuila. He's from a town of maybe 400 people, so a very small pueblito in Coahuila.
Okay. This is Miss Salena Guipzot. And so could you tell us a little bit about where you're from, kind of give us a little bit of background about San Antonio and other areas you may have lived leading up to this point?
Yeah, I think that's part of my story. I know it is, actually. So I grew up nomadic. I grew up all throughout the country, living in 11 states before I was 11 years old, had a lot to do with it. Of course, me traveling abroad in my 20s and so forth thereafter. But on my mom's side, I'm from the east side of San Antonio. And on my father's side, I am third generation West Sider, is where we're at, which is El Corazon, the heart of San Antonio. So if you're of Mexican descent, this was the only side of town that you could live in after the Mexican Revolution. And so that's why the West Side is predominantly Mexican-American in this area. But my abuela lived in this neighborhood. My father grew up in this neighborhood, attended high school at Lanier. Even myself, I, lived and worked in this area. Even won Golden Gloves twice in my life here on the West Side. So,
nice. Okay.
Just a lot that's going on. And then, of course, my suegro, my father-in-law, lived in this just up the street from our wine shop tasting room when he worked on the Tower of America. So my husband and I, Eduardo and I, were extremely intentional about opening the first all Mexican wine shop tasting room in the country here in El Corazon de San Antonio.
That's cool. And is it because of your travels that you kind of got into art as well?
Yes, it is. It's and I did study, actually. I have a minor in art history. And it was that exposure. Interestingly enough, the professor that was teaching me art history really exposed me, and it's what drove me to then travel to Amsterdam and Barcelona and visit the museums and travel into seeing the art world, which I've always enjoyed. And, he was one of the few professors that was actually from the West Side.
Oh, cool.
So to have him come in and teach me art, and I think that's part of my travels as well. And so I like to say, and it's certainly not my saying, but, wine is the only art that you can actually drink. And so these worlds have collided for me, which is travel, wine, and art all together.
Okay. Now, did you pick up a little bit of the wine bug when you were doing part of your travels on the West Coast in the Oregon area?
I did. So and that's where it all really started. So I lived in the Pacific Northwest, Portland, for about 6 years, went to school out there. I was working for a couple of M&A firms, mergers and acquisitions. And often, our CEO would take us out to the vineyards. But every time we closed a deal, the guys would, drop $3,000 to $5,000 a night to see who could buy the most expensive wine. And my CEO was like, hey, you got to learn how to talk shop. And so getting exposed to some of the best Pinot Noir in the world, in the Pacific Dundee Hills, was really the awakening point for me in terms of just culture, the wine culture, the education. I just went back this summer for Women in Wine in Oregon.
Okay.
Just that was really the nucleus for me of starting in the wine world, if you will.
Okay. Now, was there a particular wine there in Oregon or somewhere else abroad that kind of lit the bulb for you in terms of the wines and going down that rabbit hole?
Yeah. So it wasn't the, the Pacific Northwest or even abroad. It was when I had my very first Mexican wine that really just started it all. We were on a road trip to visit my husband and his family in Coahuila, and we stopped in Pueblo Mágico, a magic town is what they're called, and it was Cuatro Ciénegas, and beautiful town. And I had my very first Mexican wine, still to this day, probably one of my top 3 reds that I enjoy. It's a 4 blend, so Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, Merlot, and Syrah.
Ooh, nice.
Just a delicious. And so I credit that had I not had my palate from Portland to recognize how amazing this wine was, I wouldn't have known otherwise, right? And so to be able to compare it. But interestingly enough, I opened the wine shop before I got all of my wine education thereafter, right? So,
okay.
But it was that one wine that really started it off for me. And usually I'm asleep going there and coming back, and my husband does all the driving. But this time my business brain, my seeing that how are we so close to Mexico and we have no idea that Mexico is producing wine at this caliber, was really just what started it for me.
That's great. Now, I understand your husband, you were talking a little bit about the ancestry early on. Did you get the bug before you found out there was all these connections between your husband's ancestry and what you were wanting to do with the wine shop and visiting Mexico and tasting more Mexican wines?
Yeah, well, so, drinking wine on a professional level and networking, that really started in my mid to late 20s in Portland, Oregon, which, wine drinking is just as robust as coffee, right? So it's all of the above. but it's the going down the Mexican wine rabbit hole really was my time in Mexico, right? And still continues. We did a couple of trips just this year alone. We just got back from Querétaro, San Luis Potosí, going to the wine festivals there, learning wine in Mexico can be very regional, just like here in the States. So, you have to go to these specific wine festivals to try the local, even the boutique vineyards, right, that we might not get access to. But yeah, once again, it was that road trip to Cuatro Ciénegas where I had my first Mexican wine. And between the wine and my business brain is really where I put pen to paper and just drew out a business plan, a very informal one of how can I bring this on a much larger scale so that people can enjoy and learn themselves.
Okay. We're getting ready to get into your tasting room here. But one other question about Mexico. That's a huge country. Is Mexico's terrain and climate, is it very local to only a few specific areas that are big into the wine scene? Or do you find a lot of different regions throughout the country of Mexico doing some big things with Mexican wine?
Yeah, so it's interesting. You're right. Like Mexico is so vast in its land and its terroir is so different from region to region. There's 17 states right now in Mexico, so that's over half of the country producing wine right now.
Okay.
So if we were to put a map of Europe on top of Mexico, even southern Texas, northern Mexico, longitude, latitude, exactly the same. So all the same grapes that are growing from Portugal to France, so forth, Spain, you're going to find in Mexico as well. When you look at Coahuila, which is all desert, but then you have these microclimates, right, that make it really interesting, that allow them to grow a variety of grapes. But, if you were to look at Coahuila in southern Texas, yeah, clay, limestone, sand, etc., you're going to get the same terroir. It's when you start to go further south, like once again, we're in Querétaro, they have volcanic rock, right? And so that ultimately changes the dynamic of the grapes and how they're grown. And the minerality, right? Like you can taste the minerality throughout Mexico.
Okay.
And that every state in its terroir and its terrain is just completely different. And that even applies to the rainfall, right? So some states have difficulty with irrigation and really figuring out their water supply, while others have ample water, right? And too much water is also a bad thing.
Sure.
And so there's parts of Mexico that aren't concerned about the water and for their grapes because there's plenty of rainfall throughout the year, where you're getting then into some of your drier climates that really have to struggle to produce for their grapes.
Okay. I also wondered why or how, I know they have that big water influence from our ocean over there in the Pacific, how that influences some of the grape growing areas and also elevation. I've never been to the inner country of Mexico, but I do understand that there is some high elevation areas. And I'm wondering if some of the wineries and vineyard owners are taking advantage of that higher elevation and also that Pacific Ocean influence, coming across the vineyards.
Yeah, definitely. When you look at Baja California, whether it's south or north, norte del sur, you're getting that sea salt off the ocean coming in and hitting the vines, right? So, whether it's the vineyards from Montechenique or some of your more boutique, even your larger Santo Tomas, like these vineyards it's a very different West Coast texture, right, in your wine. And we'll actually drink one today from Baja. So looking forward to that. However, when you're getting into your central Mexico, Mexico City, Querétaro, Puebla, you're having higher elevation, even Guanajuato. It can range anywhere from 2,300 all the way to 7,800 feet above sea level. So they're producing grapes like Malbec, right? And they're having some phenomenal Malbecs being produced because of that elevation. And so, you have different varieties that are growing in certain regions. Some regions are really stronger in some grapes than others. And it has everything to do with elevation. I mean, even Querétaro, La Ruta is vino, arte, and queso, so wine, art, and cheese. But they're known for their espumosos, their sparkling wines. And so they're becoming very popular in that region for their sparkling wines because of the elevation.
Okay. Now, is there any, and we'll probably get into this a little bit later, but since it's kind of on my mind here, are there any vineyard producers or wineries getting into the categories of organic growing or more all natural type of wine production that you know of?
Yeah, no, they're actually, interestingly enough, the oldest vineyard in the Americas, Casa Madero from 1597. They're the oldest vineyard in the Western Hemisphere from Alaska down to Brazil. And on one side, they're the first vineyard that you get into when you drive into Parras. On one side, they have all of their regular grapes. On the other side, they're growing organic grapes, right? And so they're probably one of the 5 that I know of that are producing organic grapes just because of the cost in terms of permitting and so forth and the requirements. So yes, and those are becoming very popular. And then you're having more boutique. I think of one, interestingly enough, he's from Querétaro and he actually went to St. Mary's University here in San Antonio, and he's producing all natural wines. And so, you're getting more boutique vineyards that are specializing in certain wines and finding their niche, where you're having your much larger vineyards such as Casa Madero that has the bandwidth to not only produce organic grapes, but to produce at a level that you see in other parts of the world.
Okay. Now, are there a lot of wineries that are trying to model things after Casa Madero, since it is one of the oldest wineries in the Americas? Are they taking some type of guidance from those guys, since they've been doing it for so long, to try to, move their wine production and grape growing forward? What do you think about that?
Oh, definitely. We were in San Luis and Potosí, and I had a delicious Viognier from Zacatecas. And so we connected with the owner there while we were there, and we'll actually be presenting his Viognier and his Cabernet Sauvignon here. And they both won gold their first year out.
Wow.
Right.
Nice. Yeah.
But when I start to inquire, how are y'all out of the gate producing such amazing wines? Well, they're actually consulting with Dr. Joaquin Madero, who is the winemaker from Casa Madero, right?
Oh, great. Yeah.
So they're smart about it, and they're capturing that knowledge, that all that institutional knowledge that he has, and so that once they're producing, they know exactly what to do. They, of course, have a blank canvas to work from, but they're getting all of this knowledge on the back end to produce high quality wines. And so, yes, they are, I don't want to say utilizing, but they're certainly, looking at that advantage of having someone with so much institutional knowledge to help support them to produce such a high quality wine out of the gate.
Wow, that's great. Let's get into talking about your project here in the West Side. You call it the heart of San Antonio. Talk about how you decided to get that project going. Why did you choose the West Side of San Antonio to plant roots and try to serve the community with exceptional Mexican wines?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Mike. I think it's so important. Both my husband and I are very proud of our roots, nuestras raíces. And so it was really important for us to make sure that Mexican wine was accessible to everyone. And so we wanted to bring that to the heart of San Antonio, the West Side of San Antonio, where, like I mentioned earlier, my roots come from, and that, I grew up hearing stories about the West Side and being told stories. And so I ultimately became a storyteller myself through wine and sharing the history between San Antonio and Mexico and using wine as that vehicle. But ultimately, it was to make sure that everybody could access good quality wine. So many of our generations thereafter, whether they're first, second, third, even up to fifth, right? If I have someone that's 11th generation San Antonian, they want to connect so much with their roots from Mexico. And so not knowing that Mexico produces wine, I want to say my biggest flex isn't so much, the economic drive of having people spend money in the West Side, but it's actually creating space for those that are from this neighborhood, from this barrio, and having them be able to have a space like a tasting room to come and explore and to learn about wine, because wine has never been part of the Mexican culture, right? Unless it's only it was only presented through the church, right? And so if you were taking communion, that was when you probably sipped on some wine. But other than that, it wasn't part of the day-to-day interactions. Now, my suegro, my father-in-law, would have, after a long day of working in the monte, in the mountains, would come down and have una copita de vino, a cup of wine, and it was called sangre de Cristo, so Christ's blood, right? And so once again, being tied to the church itself. So we wanted to make sure that history was preserved, that we too are educating people and creating that space for community to really enjoy and learn about Mexican wine, right? Not everybody is able to travel. Not everybody is able to, take that time or have that access to it. So we bring it to the people. And so, in doing so, we have created the largest wine club in San Antonio. And our diversity in our wine club is so beautiful, between African Americans, Mexican Americans, Mexicans, Caucasians, even Asians. Like, everybody is just, if you're a wine connoisseur, you just love wine.
Yes.
You're so curious and to be able to learn. And so, yes, I'm presenting new wines from all over the 17 states that produce wine, but I actually get to bring in the wine owners, the sommeliers, the enologos, the winemakers, and my wine club members get to learn from them directly. So for me, it was all about accessibility and making sure that our community got to enjoy the fruits of their labor.
Sure. Now, as a business owner and establishing a business model for coming into the west side of San Antonio and establishing this tasting room, did it make you nervous, based on what you just said, that there wasn't a lot of wine in the culture's background? Did it make you a little bit nervous on how it will be received, accepted, and in terms of a business mindset, flourish financially in this area?
Yeah, I don't want to, I certainly don't want to minimize it by any means, because it has been a learning process, right? A learning curve from the wine space to the culture space, and then certainly the business space. It's, you have your bright-eyed, bushy tails and they're like, oh, all about wine. But let me just tell you and everyone out there that I, put myself in this position not realizing it was an uphill battle, right? Like it was, we're in a part of the town that is probably one of the most economic disadvantaged communities. And so people don't necessarily have that excess income to just spend on wine, right? So that's part of it. And then once again, the culture part, it's not, from the day-to-day, locals, even San Antonians, not everyone, but you just don't have the same wine markets as you do in other major cities. And so, yeah, all of that was the uphill battle that I'm still climbing, and I'm pushing a rock up the hill. But it's there. It's the wine. I think, building out such a robust wine club lets me know. And even though I may not have people that walk through my door on a daily basis for a tasting or buy a bottle, it's my wine club members that truly support me and keep my doors open. And I'm so grateful to them, not only for taking that risk, but wanting to learn with me, along with me, and really just putting their money where their mouth is and saying, hey, like, I'm going to support you because I appreciate the work that you're doing and what you're teaching us in return.
Sure.
And so they see the value in that. And I greatly appreciate my wine club members for that. And all of it's been an uphill battle, but I want to say I'm so thankful. I love the way I'm learning. I love how I'm learning. I love the pace in which I'm learning. And we'll get into our signature events, but we're going to be opening up our second location at La Vita.
Nice.
So we're excited for that. And of course, that will bring all the tourists and they'll enjoy this experience that they can't get anywhere else. And so I think my locals won't go downtown. So I'm keeping my Zocalo location and my tasting room because my locals love coming into the West Side. And, I have people that drive from out, Canyon Lake, Helotes, all throughout. So it's not only my local neighborhood, but it's individuals. I have wine members in Austin, people that come in from Houston,
Sure.
Right? And they just love learning about Mexican wine.
What I will say about the Hispanic culture and the family support that usually comes with that. If it's one or two or five, that slow growth in terms of support and family will continue to move things forward. And I applaud you for dropping roots in the West Side of San Antonio in order to start a project like this. And you're talking about how robust your wine club is. I don't doubt that at all, because I know that it can take off like that just by one after another. If you're presenting a good product, and clearly you are with these wonderful Mexican wines, it's going to continue to move forward. So again, thanks for doing that for this community. So let's talk about a few of the producers that you like to bring in that are doing some real phenomenal things in Mexico that maybe our listeners don't know about, and maybe tie some of the great varietals that they're making south of the border to kind of get their wines on our wine radar here in Texas.
Yeah, so I mentioned 17 states. There's actually 8 different wine regions. Coahuila is known as the Vinos and Dinos. So they have dinosaur fossils at each vineyard to really help with tourism.
Okay.
Querétaro is known as the Vino Arte and Queso, so wine, art, and cheese. So every region has its own theme, if you will. And the varieties vary, right? And so even we're looking at Querétaro, which my husband and I just returned from. Puerta del Lobo is a vineyard that is a phenomenal vineyard in Querétaro, about an hour and a half outside of the main city. And yeah, they're producing some phenomenal wines, even their oak, right? Like their Tío Neto is a Malbec Tempranillo and Merlot blend, and it is in French, American, and Hungarian oak, right? So, and they classify that's the reserve, their reserva. They classify that as an artisan wine because they continue with the tradition of stepping on the grapes, so pressing the grapes, right? And of course, they do it in a manner in which no contamination happens, but they are reserve that labor for their high end wines, right? And so Puerta del Lobo, I really enjoy a lot of boutique vineyards as well. So San Juanito, we just went to as well. Beautiful vineyard to attend to and just travel and visit. And then you're also like coming back to Coahuila, where my husband's from, right? Parras de la Fuente, Coahuila, 35 full production vineyards. Casa Madero, you have to go to if you ever get a chance. That, of course, being the oldest vineyard in the Americas. And then another wine vineyard that we truly enjoy is Rivero Gonzalez. Between their labels and how they're producing and presenting their wines, it's just phenomenal. And then, of course, you have Parvada that's making some amazing wines. One of our favorite vineyards is Don Leon, and they're actually a German family that migrated to Monterrey after World War II. Wow. We're drinking, you have a phenomenal buffet, and before that buffet, they're pouring you a Stella wine to coat your stomach for digestive purposes for all the wine to come.
Okay.
And we have they have a delicious, phenomenal Zinfandel Rosado, right? So you're having grapes in Coahuila, of course, your Cabernet Sauvignon, your Cabernet Franc, Caladoc, which is a Spanish grape, which is a blend of Malbec and a hybrid of Grenache and Malbec. You're having Pinot Noir, which is insane to think about, to go from the Pacific Northwest, drinking Pinot Noir to drinking Pinot Noir in the desert.
Yeah.
Syrah and Tempranillo, just to name a few.
Okay.
Your Chardonnay, your Chenin Blanc, even I think of this vineyard in Guanajuato. It's called San Miguel, and they make Semillon, right? And so
Yes.
Semillon is
Love
very,
Semillon.
is a little hard to find in the States, or it doesn't get produced as much. But they're even blending Semillon and Chardonnay, right? And so regionally speaking, each region will have its strong grapes that they choose to grow and produce. It's all about the winemaker. They're also, Mexico's bringing in winemakers from around the world. So Argentina, Italy, Spain, Chile. And so they come with all this wealth of knowledge already and looking at the terrain and what can grow really well. But I don't want to minimize the Mexican enologos that are learning as they're growing, because they know their land better than anyone else, right?
Absolutely.
And so everything is locally grown, meaning the enologo, the winemaker, will know exactly what fruit did well that year, what grapes are growing well that year, and they're really just kids in a candy store getting to select locally everything that they're putting into their wines.
Sure, and that's the best way to understand their vineyard and what they're producing is having boots on the ground, being in the vineyard. In terms of some of the producers that you're bringing in from Mexico, are you finding that a lot of the Mexican winemakers, are they doing a lot of blends there, or are there a lot of single varietal wine production going on there in Mexico? Can you speak to that?
Yeah. So there's no AVA in Mexico. So the winemakers they really have a blank canvas, if you will. When I was in San Luis Potosí, we went to a Mexican wine festival there, and we visited a vineyard, Pozo de Luna, right outside of the airport of San Luis Potosí. And I drank my first 5 blend ever.
Wow. Okay.
Right.
Yeah,
and so having a blend like Malbec, Tempranillo, Syrah, Merlot, and then whatever else they had in there was, and like I mentioned earlier, my favorite was a 4 blend from Coahuila, Nacova. But if I were to think about it, I would say it's probably like a 40-60 split, meaning 4 on single grape variety. But they're making some phenomenal blends. And we'll actually just sip on one today.
Cool.
That is from Rivero Gonzalez in Coahuila, 55% Syrah, 25% Cabernet, and 20% Merlot. So just a really nice blend. And I really see that the alcohol level in the wines, that they're doing such a great job in the production that it's a little scary because you don't taste the alcohol, right? Like it's so
that's a good thing.
Yeah, it's so well made that you can get those earthy tones, those tobacco, oaky, leather, chocolate, but then how rich the fruit and the berries are, right? Like dark plum, dark cherries. I mean, they're literally picking it just outside of their windows, and this is all locally grown. So, a 40-60 split. I think they're making some phenomenal blends that I truly enjoy. And I think it helps people. So if they're new to the wine world or they're learning about Mexican wines, I think it allows people to get exposed in a way in which they can see the difference from the grapes, right? So I will do wine tastings where I'll do like 5 Cabernet Sauvignons, right, from 5 different states so that they can try. And they start to recognize that, hey, every region has its entire profile or characteristics in that grape, right? And that it all depends on all of these other elements that make that wine what it is today, right? But like I mentioned earlier, I had, wine from San Miguel vineyard in Guanajuato, and they're blending even whites, right? Semillon and Chardonnay, right?
Sure, why not?
So even I'm looking forward, one of the vineyards se llama Guaname, and they're from Guanajuato as well. They have a fabulous 4-blend Pájaro Azul, so Bluebird, and they just came out with their rosé, and even that rosé is Tempranillo, Malbec, and Moscato, right? So
Sounds delicious.
Yeah, I can't wait, to bring that in and start just sharing that. Earlier this year, I did a War of the Roses.
Okay, yeah.
So we had like 5 different rosados, rosés from all different parts of Mexico. And I just let people really get to explore the different regions that way. I think it really helps when you have comparisons.
Okay. Now, how do you decide which producers to bring in? Do you take these trips, and you mentioned earlier that you have been down there in Mexico here recently. Do you take trips down to the wineries and to visit the producers? Or do they come here to Texas and bring their wine bag and, open up the bag and say, hey, we have 6 to 8 wines that we'd like you to try. Would you consider bringing them in? How do you go through that tasting process and the decision process to bring in wines from Mexico?
Of course. So I want to clarify that we are retailers only. So we're not distributors or importers. It's a 50-50 split, meaning that these wines are already being imported, whether they're being imported by the vineyard directly or they're being imported then distributed. So you have local distributors that will already have their Mexican wine lineup, right?
Okay, sure.
And so I get to taste and, not based off of my palate, but the palate of the general population. And I hand select all of my wines. So every wine in my portfolio is something that is fabulous. It's just about your preference and what mood you're in, right, for that day.
Right.
However, I have to go to Mexico. There's no one here locally. At this point, I'm really the leading expert in Mexican wine. And
Sure.
so going directly to the source, going to the vineyards, it's interesting. So out of all of the wine that's being imported or exported from Mexico into the U.S., maybe only 30% of it will ever be exported, 30 to 40%. It's growing with time as more importers pick up Mexican wine and the market's growing. But a lot of the vineyards are going to keep will keep their best of their best to their vineyards,
Sure.
right? Why they want people to visit them. You can only get this wine
Makes
at
sense.
the vineyard itself. Or I even think of like a vineyard like Puerta del Lobo, where 90% of their wine production goes straight into the restaurant. So they don't have to worry about finding outside sources to purchase their wine. They manage the whole process. There's another vineyard, Sactal. He's the only indigenous vineyard out in Baja. From seed to shelf. So he's growing, he's producing, he's even bottling, and he's importing or exporting and distributing, right? Like he can do it all because of his vineyard license, right? And so you're having a mix of everything. You have your boutique vineyards that maybe they don't have the support or the money to pay for their exporting license and so forth. So they have to find distributors. So it becomes a little difficult. So it's easier for me to already recognize wines that are being imported and me decide which wines I want to present.
Okay.
And then I do both. So then I'll go to Mexico. We'll go to all the festivals that are throughout Mexico throughout the year. And we'll start talking to the vineyards. Hey, we have the first all Mexican wine shop in the country in San Antonio. Would you be interested in importing your wine, or would you be interested in presenting your wine in the U.S. market? And of course, they love the idea. But then they have to apply for their permit. They have to export and find a distributor. And we can make some recommendations to them based off of that.
Okay.
But that's certainly not our role or a role that we can play. But the knowledge goes from both ends. So there's already an existing lineup that's here in the States that I decide on. And then, of course, when I travel and I figure out what wines will work really well in our market and in my portfolio, then I will help or encourage or at least guide the wine owners, the vineyard owners into how to start the process so that they can present their wines in the U.S. market.
Okay, that's great. And you mentioned that they don't really have to worry about so much exporting their wines because a lot of their wines can go directly into restaurants there in town. And it's one of the problems that we seem to have here in Texas. We can't seem to get a lot of Texas wines, and we have a lot of fantastic Texas wines out there that just can't get into a lot of the restaurants in this huge state for whatever reason. But that topic is for another day, and that's being discussed around the state. But having yourself as a representative, and you have a huge working knowledge of the wines that are coming in, and allowing yourself in this tasting room to represent several different Mexican wines is fantastic. But I wonder, how do we continue to move things forward? And you're being a pioneer and a trendsetter of getting these wines out, because before I came to your shop, I hadn't tasted very many Mexican wines, and I was blown away by what you have here. And just with that, I was like, I have to have Salena on to talk about these wines. And I know that there's a lot of other not only Texas wine drinkers, but United States wine drinkers that are probably not getting their hands on that very minimal representation. You're talking about, 20-30% of the wines coming in from Mexico. Man, how do we continue to get some exposure on those wonderful wines?
Yeah, it's going to be hard, and it's certainly a long process. I will say in the past few years, we've seen tremendous growth in the market, right? Where
Okay, good.
people are picking up on it. The restaurants are finally picking up on it. The Mexican restaurants, you're having other individuals wanting to present the wine. The difficulty is, though, if you don't have someone as knowledgeable or passionate like I am to talk about the wines, they're going to sit on the shelf, unfortunately, right?
Sure.
And so they're going to say, hey, they don't have any momentum. There's not any movement going on. It's really hard. And a lot of Mexican wine owners don't necessarily want their wines in Total Wine Specs or HEB because they know they'll be in a sea of wines, right? And so unless you have someone extremely knowledgeable that can speak and can share on them, they might just sit there. But I think it's, of course, supporting our business, supporting the work that we're doing, the continuation of the education, whether it's through our wine club or even our wine trips that we do from individuals throughout the year. Next year, we'll have 4 trips to Querétaro, Baja California, Guanajuato, and Coahuila. But you have to know someone to get you there and to figure out all the logistics. But I think it's that continual exposure, education, even you asking, like if you're at a restaurant, hey, do you have a Mexican wine? Can I taste something that you have on your menu, your wine list from Mexico? And I think it's going to be people asking for it and saying, hey, I want to see this on your wine list, or what can you bring? I even did a presentation in Austin this past weekend at the Wine and Food Foundation. Mexican restaurant, very high end. I think rated like top 3 restaurants in Austin. And he probably only had 2 Mexican wines on his list, right? So we have to even encourage our own people to say, hey, like, vale la pena. It is worthwhile to put your Mexican wines on your wine list because it will encourage others and their curiosity to then drink and inquire more about Mexican wine. So, and I think that was part of one of your initial questions was like, you find yourself in this space, Salena, we're going up this mountain, but I think that in just the 3-4 years that I've been in the Mexican wine scene, that I've seen tremendous growth, and it's going to be the importers and the distributors that really pick up on it. But, like I tell even the vineyard owners, the end game are your retailers, like ourselves, right? Like
Sure.
Being able to sell and present not only a bottle, but a glass of wine, and then continue that education throughout.
Okay. And you're mentioning education. Are those some of the events that you hold here in your tasting room occasionally, or monthly, some educational events that people can come in and taste 5 or 6 wines and kind of go through your tasting menu? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it is. We hold events all throughout the year. I curate some fabulous events, whether it's vino and mole, vino and opera, vino and cigars, right? Just encouraging people different ways to pair Mexican wines, with other, cultural items that we enjoy greatly. But yeah, like whether it was the War of the Roses or like on International Sauvignon, Cabernet Sauvignon Day, like just then presenting 5 different, and those events sell out quickly, right?
Okay.
And it's just, you can always come into the wine shop or the tasting room and do a wine tasting, 3 tastings for $35 or $50 for all reserves, reservas, is your best way. And the great thing is that when you come into our wine shop, you'll never taste the same 3 wines. So we have about 60 different Mexican wines in our portfolio. So just depending on the season and what we also get access, we're beholden to the distributors and the importers and so forth. But ideally, it's those educational classes that we do quarterly for our wine club members. But even people that just come through our doors, they can always learn more about Mexican wine and just the subject matter through a Wednesday through Sunday wine tasting. So
Sure.
what I do have coming up that I want to encourage people, because this is going to be an annual thing, our second annual Vino Fest. That's going to be at La Villita this year. Last year, we held it in the South Side. Great weather. I think we're finally getting our 80-degree weather next weekend, so I'm super excited for that. Friday night, La Cena, we'll have a 5-course elevated Mexican cuisine at La Villita with Chef Carlos Martinez, and I'll be pairing those each dinner or each plate with wines from Puerto del Lobo. The vineyard owner and his wife will be joining us. We'll have a 50-person dinner setup. So really just an intimate evening to enjoy good food, good wine under the stars. And then of course the next day is Vino Fest. So for $50, you can try up to 50 Mexican wines at La Villita from 2 to 6. Very much an invitation, not a challenge, but it's there should you want it. But just a great way to try all of the different wines that Mexico's producing throughout the country. And I look forward to that because not only is it our largest event, but every year you're going to try something new, right? Every year we're going to have new wines to add to our portfolio. New vineyards are popping up. New regions are popping up. And then, of course, new lineups are coming in. So even Rivero Gonzalez, that we enjoy their wines, they already have a brand new lineup that we'll be showcasing in 2025. So it's gives you the opportunity to explore and to really just talk to ourselves, both my husband and I. And then we will invite wine owners, wine sommeliers from Mexico, the enologos, to come and talk about the wine. So that's this year. We know how fast the fourth quarter goes from October, November, December.
Sure.
But in addition to all of that, this year, what I'm really looking forward to is in the first quarter in 2025, Palo Alto College, I serve on their advisory committee for their viticulture and oligo program here. And so we'll do Women in Wine, so Mujeres en Vino, and we'll actually bring in Mexican wine enologos and sommeliers to Palo Alto College in March to get them to not only to bring more women into the wine industry, but to bring more people of color into the wine industry from all facets, whether it's the grape growing process to the cellars, to the front end, sommeliers and so forth, wine associates, because we know labor is going to be the hardest part of all of this. And so even Puerto del Lobo that will be in Johnson City, they're going to need a pipeline of wine individuals that know their product and can speak to it. And so it's those partnerships that I really look forward to. But I think as we continue to educate people locally, but to bring in people from all throughout Mexico to really talk about what they're doing and to hear from them directly will be an experience like no other.
That sounds like a fantastic program. You got your eye on the prize with a lot of these different things you have going on. I don't know where you find the time to do all this stuff, but looking forward, and you just talked about, 2025, but down the road here in about 5 years or so, what do you see the vision outside of your second location going forward, what do you want to see? Where do you want to see your growth going in the next few years with Casa Guipzot?
Yeah, Mike. I mean, there's so much potential out there. I got to sometimes slow my own roll, right? Which is really hard to do. But just the excitement of it all, to how blessed I am to think that this is, my life now is just traveling throughout Mexico and learning about wine and tasting wine and then sharing that experience with others that genuinely enjoy learning themselves and having someone like myself be that person, that conduit, if you will, to teach them and to learn from. So yeah, in 2025, La Vita will be a beast of its own. We're excited about that. My hope is, construction is one thing, and, thankfully we are in the construction world. Lalo is my husband. So we hope to be open before December 1st so we can get that Christmas rush and that celebration going out. So I look forward to having you out when we do our wine, our ribbon cutting. But thereafter, I already have our plans of opening up a kiosk at the airport, the San Antonio airport, as they're building out their new terminal, right? As we have visitors from throughout the country, even Mexican nationals coming in and being like, wow, we can get Mexican wine in San Antonio. And so we've already had pop-ups like at La Vita, and that first pop-up I sold out in 2 hours. Wow. From Canadians buying Mexican wine, right? Like it was just all over the board. So I'm excited for that because it's going to be a very different model from my tasting room here. We'll have, of course, our shop, our tasting room, but I'll have wine dispensers so people can actually, try an ounce, 3 ounces, 5 ounces, and really touch screen so that they can see a 30-second video of the vineyard, the winemaking process, learn from it directly. So I'm so excited about that. And that will probably take me into the second quarter of 2025, but already getting us in the airport in San Antonio. And then even at La Cantera, like looking at opening up a kiosk there. I saw the other day that they have a beer kiosk kind of in the middle. So doing the, similar model there and replicating that and then making it just a wine dispenser so that people can try Mexican wine.
Okay.
And so opening that. And then, of course, I already, like I mentioned, in June, July, I was just in Oregon. We will expand our portfolio to vineyards with Mexican roots. So you have vineyards like Alumbra in Oregon, in McMinnville, right?
Okay.
Whose father was from Durango, Mexico, and he bought land in the 80s, which is like an hour, 30 minutes outside of the Dundee Hills. And so you have Mexican Americans producing wine in Oregon, California, and now Texas, right? And so we'll expand our portfolio to not only vineyards in Mexico, but vineyards with Mexican roots, right? And so we're excited to bring that into the fold. But yeah, my plan is to open up a wine shop in Portland and a tasting room and beat this Texas heat and go half the year up there and stay half the year down here. And, I love the Pacific Northwest, the nature, the outdoors, the good coffee. And so there's already a Mexican wine market out there, which is interesting. So cool. I won't have to do all the work or the heavy lifting. There's already some established market there. Yeah, but, I get people always come to me and they're even the people that are doing a wine tasting today and they're like, hey, I wish we had you in Dallas. I wish we had you in Houston. And so I am already looking at the Houston market.
Okay, cool.
Because it is such a wine drinking city. And, it's not, people think, oh, well, there's such, a large population of Mexicans in those certain cities, but it's really not that. Mexicanos don't drink wine, so it's not part of the culture. So it's not to say that, hey, you're going to get, more consumption because of that population. On the contrary, it's all of the wine connoisseurs, the enthusiasts that want to learn about Mexico and its wine production. Sure. Because once they learn about the history. They're already fans of Mexican beer, Mexican tequila. So when you start to think about it, it makes sense that Mexico is producing and creating such amazing high caliber wine because of the terrain, because of the terroir, because of their vast knowledge in agriculture, right? And they're growing, and the labor, right? Like these are labors of love. So these are generational families that are working the vineyards, not seasonal or migrant, right? Workers. These are people from their grandfathers to their children to now their grandchildren working the vineyards with love and pride in what they're producing. So I think it's only a matter of time that as I work through, where I see us growing in 2025 and beyond, I think that we're going to continue to push the needle and just bring Mexican wine to the tables of everyone to enjoy.
Well, we appreciate you charging forward and being the voice and the selection of Mexican wines right here in San Antonio to start with. Kind of putting things on the map. If there's anything else you want to discuss or put out there for our listeners, go ahead and let us know. Is there something else that we need to put on our radar for Mexican wines or for Casa Guipzot?
Yeah, of course. Like I mentioned, Mike, and I just want to reiterate this. Our Vino Fest is this Saturday at La Villita. You can go to our website, casaguipzot.com/Vino Fest, and check out the tickets there from 2 to 6. Of course, you can also click on the tab wine tastings or wine club, and see our different levels of our wine club. Just a great way to taste all of the wines throughout Mexico. And then, this will be an annual event. So if you can't make it out this weekend, because we know the weather is, better in October and people are just out and about, so much going on, all of the wine events that you mentioned, if it's not this year, plan for it next year. And you can always just go to our website, casaguipzot.com, and subscribe. That way you get our emails. That way you see all of the events that we're curating, and just the opportunities, right? Whether it's our individual events like our Vino and Mole, or the wine club or a wine tasting that what you want to do. But the one thing I really enjoy or our space is our private events. So even if you want to celebrate someone's birthday, celebrate a graduation or a wedding or a celebration anniversary, and you wanted to be in a space that you just really enjoy the vibe, the ambiance, it's Casa Guipzot, our tasting room. We have this as well as a much larger facility that we can use. And then, of course, our La Villita location that I'm excited to open up. But yeah, just go to casaguipzot.com. And then, of course, I encourage everyone to follow us on social media, Casa_Guipzot on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and LinkedIn. You can find me, and just a great way to stay in touch and see everything that we have going on throughout the year, because we have our signature events throughout the year, but things are popping up on a monthly basis. Cool. Whether it's us celebrating International Verdejo Day and getting to try verdejos throughout Mexico, or Cabernet Sauvignon, all of these Pinot Noir days, right? It just allows us to then showcase, that specific grape variety from Mexico in that celebration. So I also want to mention that October 7th, which just passed last Monday, is actually International Dia de Vino Mexicano, so Mexican Wine Day. Okay. So every year, nice. October 7th, we do something on that day. But just a great way to then celebrate Mexican wine and to continue to learn about it.
That's fantastic, Salena. So much going on with Mexican wine. Guys, listen, you got to come out. And if you're in the San Antonio area, if you're coming from surrounding cities, definitely come out and visit her tasting room down here in the west side of San Antonio. Casa Guipzot. You will not be disappointed. The wines are fantastic. Her knowledge of these wines it goes above and beyond. I've had several great tastings here, and believe me, you will not be disappointed when you come down here. So definitely put her on your wine radar and put her tasting room on your wine radar, and you're going to really enjoy your experience here. So that'll do it for this week's episode. Thank you for joining us. I'm your Texas Wine Scene correspondent, Mike Cole. I look forward to seeing you next time here on the Texas Wine Scene. Cheers.
just a phenomenal job. Wine. So this is Casa Guipzot. But you can just smell all the berries, all the fruit and the fruit.